All right. Hello, everyone. Hi, I'm Sasha Chua. This is another Emacs chat. It is December 10, 2015, and I'm here with John Wiegley, who is, since the last time, who has, since the last time we talked to him, become the Emacs maintainer, among other things. So we're here today to chat about how he's dealing with increased workload and other cool things. John, over to you.
Thank you, Sasha. I'm glad to have this opportunity for us to talk again. It's been a few months.
Yeah. Okay, so, oh, by the way, if you have questions, or if people listening to this have questions, basically, you can submit questions by commenting on the event page where you find this, or the live stream, etc., or using the Q&A app that shows up, or you can pop into IRC on the Freenode network and look in the Emacs channel and post your questions there, and I'll try to remember to sneak questions in at the appropriate moment. But I want to kick things off with some questions about your new workflow now that you're dealing with the increased workload of, a high volume mailing list / news group called Emacs Devel and other things that you deal with as an Emacs maintainer. So what do you do?
Well, certainly Emacs Devel mailing list is quite high volume. So my technique for approaching that has been to customize GNUs until it makes it a more manageable source of information. I've had to tweak the scoring setup that I use. GNUs has a feature called adaptive scoring, where it will observe what you read and what you don't read, and it will try to change the ordering and the presentation of the things you see in the summary buffer when you go into the news group based on your reading preferences, or by observing your reading habits. And that has been extremely helpful, because that way, if a conversation has gotten very, very long and I realize that there's really nothing more for me to contribute on there, I can hit a key and never see that conversation ever again, unless somebody uses some sort of keyword that I have a flag for that'll pop that thread back up for me. Meanwhile, the threads I'm most interested in, or the ones I've been replying to, they will go to the top of the buffer. So they'll be the ones that I read first upon re-entering the group.
So you have something that automatically prioritizes the different threads for you based on whether you've replied to something or whether you've decided this is going way off tangent and it's just, until it comes back on topic. Not that I should be asking you which keywords should bring things back to your attention. But
well, right now it's John with a question mark. That's the one that'll pop any thread back up.
All right, you heard it here, folks. If you need to get his attention, just say John ? And John Wiegley himself will appear to deal with whatever's going on. Actually, since you can share your screen through this on this broadcast, is that something that you want to quickly demonstrate, like how this works? I'm not sure if that works live because you actually have to read things and whatever. But
sure. As I click on the screen sharing button, it's not having any functionality.
Technology. Okay, while you keep trying that, I will try to fill in the space and more kind of.
Interesting. Why would it not be there?
Okay. All right. We will demonstrate with some hand waving. Okay, actually, one thing you can try, and this may or may not break the system, but if you refresh your browser, you might get dropped back into this conversation, and that thing might work again.
All right,
want to give that a shot? Okay, so while he's coming back, and I hope this works, because otherwise, awkward. GNUs is a mail and news reader for Emacs, and I think...
Yes, that did work.
Perfect. All right. I was just telling people what GNUs is, and if you would like to go ahead and demonstrate how this helps you with the prioritization, fantastic.
Are you seeing my Emacs screen?
I see your screen.
Okay, so with a key that I have bound, I will jump into GNUs. And one thing you see here is that GNUs has the ability to create topics and to place groups under those topics. So I actually have quite a number of topics, as you can see.
Wow, I did not expect that.
Yes, normally a topic that has no active, no unread group in it is displayed. And there are key bindings, of course, to toggle these things. So we see that Emacs Devel has gotten 2 emails since this live cast began. So if I hit return on those, I have the display customized right now so that the number on the farthest left is the score that has been assigned to that article. just because I've been trying to fine-tune my adaptive scoring rules. So I want to be aware of what my actions are what effect my actions are having on the scores. I have another key to reveal all the threads. So if I go back out and I grab the last 100 messages, for example, then I can see that there are some very lengthy threads. I have a number here in this column that shows me how many messages are hidden underneath a thread. But normally I start and I just see this view where the thread with the aggregate highest score goes to the top.
Wow. So this is a thread with, that was a thread with 90 score and 42 messages underneath it?
Yes. Well, 90 was the score of the top message in the thread. Or it might have been the aggregate score. I can hit a key to see what the score of the thread itself was. So 90 was the aggregate score, and the score of that article itself is 30. And it would have gotten the score of 30 because it would have noticed me reading a message from this thread in the past. And every time I read a message in a thread, the subject of that thread gets a bump of 1. So I must have read 30 messages within this thread already for it to have a score of 30.
So folks, write good subject line headers so that John takes a look at your message. But maybe not BuzzFeed
subject lines is important. And GNUs is very handy. For example, when we have a really long thread like this and someone wants to bring up a side point, we've instituted a policy of changing the subject line when you do that. And when you change the subject line, GNUs has a way of making that appear as if it's a new thread. So you see this casting as wide a net as possible thread?
Yeah.
This actually was a part of the first draft of the Emacs website thread. But because the poster, John here, chose a different subject line, GNUs presents it to me as if it were an independent thread.
And that also allows you to track your interest and do that adaptive scoring for that particular subtopic.
Right, right. So it all plugs into adaptive scoring quite nicely. So as a result, even though there are days when the number of unread messages in the Emacs Devel group will easily reach 200 by the end of the day, it's not that difficult to get through them because it presents them to me in roughly the order I ought to read them. And if I start seeing that a thread does not really need my involvement, I can start scanning quickly or just tell GNUs I don't want to participate in this thread from this point onward, unless, of course, someone asks for me.
You're getting quite a few people more interested in GNUs according to the Emacs channel. So
GNUs is incredibly wonderful. Let me tell you, GNUs and Orgmode both are my mainstays in Emacs. They are the two applications I always have running. GNUs is somewhat like Emacs itself in that there is a learning investment to be made, but I do believe it pays itself off many times over. Further, Lars has done a brilliant job with the GNUs manual. It is not only highly informative, it is very funny. It's worth reading from front to end, more so than any other technical manual I have read. So I get quite a kick out of many of the paragraphs in the GNUs manual as I go to read about different things.
Was it you who also pointed out that the calc manual is very interesting reading? So it turns out that the info manuals for Emacs packages tend to have they tend to be quite interesting reading and very useful reading too.
Oh yeah. So I would recommend to anyone who wants to get started to GNUs to first acquire a brave heart, because it's not going to be an easy task. But go through the setup instructions, get it connected to your mail source by either reading the mail from a directory or using it over IMAP. You will find that using GNUs over IMAP is very slow, and this puts a lot of people off. So what I do is I have all of my emails get delivered to Gmail, because they have excellent spam filtering services. I use fetch mail to pull the mail from Gmail down to my local machine, where it gets queued into a into a Dovecot server that I run locally. And then GNUs talks to the Dovecot server over IMAP, and that is a very fast connection. And it lets me do local searches of email so that even if I don't have internet connectivity, I can always search all of the email I have. And there's quite a lot of email. In my Dovecot, there's close to probably 1 million email messages in there.
1 million. And one of the things I want to mention is that a large part of that million, I don't know, however large it is, but part of that million messages you have is the entire Emacs Devel archive, right?
Well, it's the Emacs Devel archive, the Emacs Bugs mailing list archive, the Emacs Help archive, the Sources archive. Usually, if I actively participate in a mailing list, I like to go download all of its past email, so that if people make reference to previous discussions, I can see those discussions without having to necessarily be online.
Mm-hmm. And that takes advantage of Muse's ability to show you all of the messages within a given thread if it knows about them.
Right. So let's say I'm on this message here, which is a response to this thread called New Update of the Emacs website, and I want to see the context. So I can hit a key, and now all of the members of this part of that thread come into my buffer. So you'll see the lines are blue here, the ones that are now inserted. So I'll do that again so you can see that happen. Let's go in here. So we see there's 3 lines in the summary buffer. I hit capital A, capital T, and now there are 25 lines in that buffer. So I get the entirety of, I get to see the message that I'm reading now in the full context of the thread in which it appeared.
Right. So Eric has a question, which he submitted to the Q&A thing. I mean, this seems like a lot of reading. How many hours per week do you spend in Emacs maintainer stuff?
I would say that in reading the Emacs Devel mailing list, it's between 1 to 2 hours a day, probably, and responding to them. I do not spend as much time fixing bugs or writing code as other contributors in this project do. So, for example, Elia Zaretsky spends a very large amount of time addressing bugs and taking care of the what is the word for it? The stability of Emacs. So I rely upon him a lot for his technical expertise, and I spend more time reading the messages, trying to see which people issues there are, what things need to be changed in our organization and our structure, so that all of these resources that we have within the community can be effective and can smoothly head us toward the next release. We have a lot of excellent people, excellent developers and volunteers and contributors, so it doesn't necessarily need me to do all of this work. We have excellent people to do that, and I just want to make sure they have what they need to get their jobs done.
That's an interesting approach to take in terms of maintaining an open source project. It's less about making all the technical contributions yourself and more about unlocking the awesomeness of the community. I guess coordinating people's efforts or reaching out to people and pulling them in.
Right, and specifically, I want to emphasize or focus on that at this point in time because I feel like we do have a much better community than we're fully taking advantage of for core Emacs development. So there are the Emacs developers who at the moment are fewer in number and maybe even a little bit overworked. Then outside of that core community, we have a very much larger community of people doing excellent work on external projects that are not part of core Emacs or are not in ELPA. They might be, for example, in the MELPA repository. And if I can bring some of those people and attract some of those outside people into the core development, then our job gets a lot easier. And that's going to be much more effective than just me becoming another programmer within the Emacs project. If I can get 5 other of those people to come in, that's going to be 5 times what I could have contributed, for example.
That's awesome. So I guess most of these people, some of them might be hanging out in Emacs Devel, but where are you keeping an eye out for these people who you can recruit basically and bring into core?
In IRC, in Twitter, there are people that I know personally who, for whatever reason, are on the outskirts of Emacs Devel. Apparently, they've told me there have been past issues with things not staying on topic or getting a little out of hand or patches sort of dying on the vine as they get submitted and then ignored. And so I want to make sure that their concerns are met and we resolve those problems, which are kind of more human scale problems than really technical problems. And if we can do that, then these people, I think, will come back. And that will just make it easier for all of us to do our jobs.
I can see how like the mailing list interface with threads and things like that. There's if you can think about there's the mailing list and then there's the bugs the bug tracker where you've got okay, this is broken, maybe there's a patch, maybe there isn't, but there isn't really that kind of trackable middle ground that says, here's an idea we've been thinking about, and maybe that's why some of these ideas are getting dropped. Can you share a little bit of how you're So you're starting to keep track of the different balls that are in the air, you know, the different things that you have on the go, to make sure that those things aren't falling through the cracks.
Right, that's an excellent question. I guess you might say that one of my tasks as maintainer is to keep an eye on these more inchoate or intangible things that people request or ask for that aren't necessarily bugs, so they don't belong in the bug database. They are ideas that get discussed on the mailing list, but as you say, when the thread gets cold, the idea might get lost. So what I do is when these come up, I have an Orgmode file that I try to track all of the ideas or the things people have suggested or expressed concerns about to make sure that something gets done. Either they get addressed or they get knowledgeably closed to say that, no, we've considered it, but we're not going to do it. So you'll see that in my org file here, I have many top-level categories. So there are things here, issues pertaining to the community, initiatives, things that I might want to begin that are not being done now. Analysis is just little sub-projects within Emacs to become more aware about potential bugs or performance problems that we might have, things that aren't in the bug tracker. And under each of these, I have several keywords that are labeled as project. So I have a project here for making improvements within our community. So one of the things I did, for example, was to ask you to be our ambassador and keep us aware of all the things happening outside of the core development. Making sure responsibility for different aspects of Emacs is more distributed evenly among the contributors so we don't get burnout. ELPA and changing the way we use ELPA. I would like us to rely upon ELPA more and have it be an easier and more facile way for people to get code into Emacs. And of course also the release schedule. So under these projects then I have various to-dos. Often, especially if they have a name here in parentheses, it means it links directly to a mailing list article. So if I hit a key to visit the link, it will pop me over to the Emacs Devel mailing list and then show me that message in the context of its discussion. Where I could also then again press capital A, capital T, and then see it. Although that didn't work, I think, because I have AT configured to only work in the current group. Anyway, but that gets me back to the original discussion and why I created that task.
Yeah. So I can see how this gives you an overview of the different initiatives that are going on, and it lets you kind of review this to follow up on things that might be falling through the cracks.
Right. So the first line of activity I do is to follow the mailing list and anything that needs to be responded to there. I also like to read through the diffs log and see what changes have been made to Emacs to see if there's anything that needs more attention. Also, I'm subscribed to the bug tracker, so I see every bug that comes in. And I try to make sure that at least some response is made to every bug, although I don't always have the time for that. And then the last thing, of course, is these other things, these other non-bug type tasks, and tracking those. I have not been as good lately at keeping on top of this list as I have at keeping on top of the mailing list, mainly because these holidays that we've had with Thanksgiving in the United States and some work trips that I've had have put me a bit behind. But I do want to get back to this org file and close these things out because people deserve to be responded to. Everything in this file represents something I felt was a legitimate concern. I think having people, when people feel that they're being responded to, I think then they will be more encouraged to take part in the core Emacs development process.
Is this a file that you're, publicly sharing, or can be convinced to share this, kind of give people the same overview that you have?
No, this isn't.
That's okay.
Yeah. But of course, I would like to maybe do something semi-regularly to sort of capture the state of the Emacs development. Have not yet, but that is something I've considered doing.
That's cool. That's cool. Okay, so you've got this org file, which you create as you read through Emacs Devel messages, bugs, and things like that. And you can jump from this org file back to the original messages. Okay, you mentioned an IRC before. You also use GNUs to read the bug reports. And I think you mentioned that GNUs can show the bug reports for a specific bug, or the kind of the conversation for a specific bug easily. Is that something you can quickly demonstrate?
Sure. So here we have, for example, bug 19547. I want to see the context of that bug. So there is a command called GNUs read ephemeral. Let's see what it was called. GNUs read ephemeral Emacs bug group. And so now I can put in here 19547, and that will contact the debug server for the Emacs project and show me the whole conversation history of that bug as an ephemeral group, which means a group that GNUs has created on the fly and that will disappear once I have left that group. And this way I can then read through the exact conversation history that has occurred in that bug.
I see. So it lets you see the entire context of it, and then you can fill it. You can add links to more information in your org file as well.
Right. So if I'm in here and I hit a key, what it'll do is create a capture buffer that links back to that email instantly. And then I just have to hit Control-C, Control-C, and now this will get added. Or I hit Control-C, Control-W, and then I'm prompted for where in the Emacs file I want to put this issue.
Org file is so powerful that way.
Yeah.
Okay, so GNUs and org help you kind of keep track of deal with the volume that's coming in and keep track of what's going on. Are there other things that you think either future maintainers of Emacs or maintainers of packages that are within Emacs, any tips that they would find useful?
You mean in the use of GNUs and org?
Or other little scripts or tools that you found helpful?
Nothing in particular. I think every maintainer has his own way of doing things and his own areas of interest, so everybody should pick whatever tool works for them.
Okay. Let's see. Let me just do a quick check for people's questions. Oh, you've let people know about Emacs Tangents, which is a fairly new mailing list, so some people didn't know about that yet. So that's cool. Yeah. Okay. So one of the things we'd want to talk about, of course, was your workflow for dealing with Emacs, and also some of the ideas you had for improving the community and taking it forward. You've shared some of it in terms of kind of making Emacs develop friendlier, bringing in people who are not core maintainers. Are there particular areas that you want to encourage people to, try contributing to, or any resources that you think might help them get started?
Sure. I think there are 3 areas in particular where I would really appreciate help, which is the first would be writing more tests. We've started creating headless tests that run as part of the Emacs build when you do make check using the ERT framework, which is an eLisp framework for creating tests. So I know that you use it for lots of things, and so you understand its value. We do not have coverage of many parts of Emacs. So people coming in who want to write new tests to address areas we're not currently testing would be incredibly valuable. Improving our documentation, especially with an eye to how it reads to someone who's not familiar with a certain subject area, would be very helpful. And then going through our bug history and finding bugs that have just never been responded to or that are no longer an issue. Checking which ones are still reproducible and which aren't. And if they are, making comments in the bug to say what you discovered in trying to reproduce the bug.
And maybe adding a test for that too.
Well, that would be ideal. The ideal would be find a bug, add a test, add something to the manual if appropriate for that bug. So these 3 areas, bugs, tests, and documentation, are the ones I would like to see addressed the most. Because Emacs core is really a foundation upon which a lot of things are built that are not part of Emacs core. And the thing I want most for Emacs core is not necessarily to add in more features and functionality. I would like it to be a more stable foundation so that the more complex applications like org and GNUs that are built upon Emacs, there's less of a moving target, it's very efficient, it's very well performing, there are no crash bugs, those types of things. So that's why I'm placing an emphasis for volunteers to contribute on bugs, tests, and documentation, because it will help give us that stable foundation to build other applications on.
I don't suppose there's already a pretty, coverage report for Emacs that people can just look at and say, okay, this file is not covered yet, or, so that people can easily see what needs testing. Do you have that going?
Philip Lord recently rearranged our tests so that they mirror the files that they're testing against in the various source directories. So you can see from that which files in the source directory have no corresponding tests at all. So if you pick a file that relates to a feature you care about, see that no test file for it exists, then you can be the first person to make that file and create the first test. And every test is valuable. I'm not asking people to commit only if they're willing to write hundreds of tests. If you want to come into the Emacs project, get familiar with development, building the current version of the sources on your own machine, and just write 1 or 2 tests, I'd be happy with anything.
Maybe one way to make this process a little less intimidating would be to, can you walk us through what a super simple Emacs core test looks like, and just how to run it and see how that all works so that people can see it's not that scary?
Since most of my attention right now has just been getting the community stuff up and running, this is not actually something I've been doing myself.
Okay, so we'll find somebody else to corner into doing a quick demo.
This is my checkout of the Emacs source tree.
Do you want to share your screen?
Oh, sorry, I forgot. Oh, it's not letting me share again. It seems it only wants to let me share once, so I will have to Oh, no, there we go. It shared it. Okay, do you see this?
It's coming. Yep, it's there now.
All right, so I have a clone here of the Emacs development tree, which I tend to build from day to day just to make sure everything is going sanely. We have a test directory in this top level of the tree. And in there, you'll see that there's an automated subdirectory, which is where Phil Lord put all of our automated testing. And so inside of here, we have all kinds of automated tests. So for example, here are some eShell tests. And they require an ERT and eShell. And then ERT def test is the command to execute a test. So I say that the result of evaluating this form should be equal to 3. And that way, when I do make check, it will run this code and ensure that that remains true.
So as you can see, the tests are really, they can be pretty short, they can be really simple, and you don't have to get in deep with lots of C or whatever else to write them. You can just use this to get started, and it's all in Emacs Lisp.
Right. Yeah, I haven't pulled in a little while here, so. Let's see.
We can wait. We don't, probably not a good idea to mess up your Git checkout of the.
Oh, I can't pull because my smart card authenticates my SSH logins. I don't have that card plugged into this machine.
That's cool. That's cool. Okay, so there's a lot of code in Emacs. Much of it is not yet tested. It would be great for people to contribute tests. But Eric has another question. If you're are you considering moving stuff out of core to have that smaller, simpler, better tested core, I guess, and more things in packages?
Yes, we are. So right now we have a few areas. We have core Emacs. What we would like to have is a concept within ELPA of core ELPA. And core ELPA are packages in ELPA that core Emacs code is able to rely upon. And that will happen by a process where core ELPA packages will be copied into the core Emacs source tree from time to time so that core Emacs can directly depend upon them. Then on top of core ELPA, there will be tarball ELPA. These will be packages that are in ELPA that are not copied to core Emacs, but which are made part of the release tarball before it goes out. And then finally, we will have like regular ELPA, which will be packages that are installable through the MetaX list packages interface, but that will not be in the tarball distribution. So right now, core Emacs has a lot of very large things in it and a lot of packages in it that don't really necessarily belong there because they're not part of the foundational API that I really think core Emacs represents. So we want to take a lot of these packages and split them out into one of these 3 ELPA categories. Very likely, everything that's currently in core Emacs will be in either core or tarball ELPA. We won't be moving it out of the distribution entirely. But doing this will make the core be smaller. The Git, when you look at Git and see what's been changing lately, that surface area will be smaller. But it also gives contributors from the outside ways to get things into the tarball distribution without it having to go into core Emacs.
And I can see how, I guess that would also simplify the update process for those packages. So.
And it gives people a way to to basically subscribe to a channel where that package will get updated frequently, even though Emacs releases might be far and few between.
Right. Cool. Okay, so simpler core, better tested, a stabler core, and then this kind of split between like important things that are in ELPA that core relies on, and things that are optional, used to be there, so you don't want to break anyone's expectations, and so they'll be included in the tarball. And then, of course, your regular ELPA and MELPA and the other package archives as well. So this universe of packages to choose from.
Right. I think ultimately the destination we'd like to end up at is that there's a core set of functionality without which Emacs cannot even be Emacs, can't even edit files. And that just sort of defines a fundamental minimum. Then anything that fundamental minimum depends upon is by definition a package that has to be in core. So that network of dependencies among this minimum will be what has to be in core. And then as much as possible that does not fit that description will go into at least tarball ELPA. So for example, Tetris. Tetris is a neat module that it's great to have on any machine just to demo to people how cool Emacs is. But the core foundational API that Emacs core represents doesn't really need Tetris to be there. So that's a package that can go into tarball ELPA very easily.
Well, I would come up with an objection about how essential Tetris is to Emacs Lisp programming, but that is a very good example, yes.
I think
Okay.
it's a good thing to always have be present in an Emacs installation. It's just we want the core developers to focus on the set that really matters in terms of defining the foundational API. Also, what's in core should always be documented, should always be tested as part of the automated tests. Not every package that we have in core Emacs today really needs that level of rigor. Tetris does not need automated tests, does not need a lot of documentation. So it's a perfect candidate for being in tarball ELPA.
There is some outrage in the Emacs channel of your dissing of Tetris.
Oh, I love the Tetris module. Didn't people hear me? I just said it should always be present in any machine that has Emacs on it.
And I'm not sure, but I'm not sure if auto Tetris counts as automated testing for Tetris, but there is a thing that automates it.
Cool.
Okay. So people can contribute by writing tests. Tests will help all that stuff happen better. Maybe at some point we can have this nice graphic that shows which files are getting how much percentage coverage, and all these lovely motivating graphs and things like that. And then, of course, as you mentioned, there's documentation to write and bugs to see if you can reproduce.
Then there's one more category that I'm personally quite interested in, which is someone to focus on and sort of take ownership of efficiency and speed of Emacs. And that's going to that would require writing another sort of not test suite but benchmarking suite that if I run it will give me a table of numbers to say how fast certain Lisp operations are, how fast certain buffer manipulation operations are, how fast starting up a graphical Emacs and creating a whole ton of frames and closing them all, how fast that is. And then to have a way of, against two builds of the benchmarking suite, show the delta, and then designate a build machine that somebody will volunteer time on where they are willing to run the benchmarking suite against the current development branch every single day and maintain the running delta as some sort of graph that shows us, are we getting slower, are we getting faster in certain areas, and where are the areas that were currently the worst. So today, an email thread came up on Emacs Devel saying that playing back keyboard macros that involve very, very, very long lines, so like lines that are 11,000 characters long, is a very slow thing. And you'd think, well, that's not entirely terrible because how often do people do this? But it would be nice to know where these limitations of current Emacs are and which are the ones we want to address.
Right, and if someone has just committed something that makes something drastically slower or drastically faster, right?
Yeah. Like I've noticed that 25.1, the release candidate, even when I build it with full optimization on, takes exactly twice as long to start up my Emacs as 24.5 does. So it's a difference of 4.3 seconds versus 8.6 seconds. And I would like to know, why is that? And when did that happen? And I don't have right now a benchmarking suite so that I could just use git bisect to take me back to the day when it got slower. So I'll have to do a specific profiling analysis to find out what made it slower. But if we had a benchmarking suite in place, I think we'd have a lot more consciousness of the ways Emacs is evolving in terms of performance and efficiency.
Mm-hmm. And I'm hearing that as part of a general improvement of the build tools that Emacs is using, is the idea of having these, continuous integration and efficiency metrics and things like that happen, so that people don't have to keep building all these little tools themselves to measure that.
Mm-hmm. And there are plenty of great tools out there for making this happen. I think what we need right now is we need a volunteer willing to devote themselves to seeing this happen and keeping it going.
It is a fair bit of heavy lifting to get started, but once it's in place, then it keeps running, we hope.
Right. Well, if there's anybody out there who loves both Emacs and performance, get in touch with me and we'll start that going.
Yeah. Well, when in terms of talking about Emacs startup times, I remember in our conversation about use package, that was one of your key motivations as well for being able to, define your own autoloads and load only the packages that you're actually using.
Right.
So it's a faster Emacs, although you're not really, the schools of thought are divided on this. Some people do actually start Emacs all the time, and some people just leave it running, but everyone benefits from having things work faster.
Right. When I'm not working on Emacs modules, I tend to just start Emacs once in the day. But if I am working on a module and I want to make sure that I'm always testing my changes against a clean environment, I will exit and restart many, many times during the day. So that's what led to my desire for faster startup.
Mm-hmm. And then in terms of other build tools or development related initiatives, I think you mentioned doing there's definitely the Git mirror is already happening. I think you vaguely mentioned looking into GitHub and pull requests or something along the lines, making it easier for people to contribute.
This would not be something that is officially endorsed by the FFF. I have a mirror of the Emacs build tree, of the Emacs development tree on GitHub, and if people want to make pull requests against it, I will copy those over into the proper channels by hand. But that is not an official port for receiving either bug requests or pull requests.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, it's good to play around with different ways, the different channels really of bringing things in. So thank you for doing that work by hand. If anyone wants to take advantage of this completely unofficial, not at all sanctioned way of bringing of submitting changes.
Cool.
Okay, so in terms of people getting started with Emacs development and Emacs contribution, that tests, documentation probably kind of the easiest for people to get started with, then testing with a little bit of Emacs Lisp, and then just digging into the bugs and making that better. And then of course, if you're interested in performance and efficiency, actually like doing the building the infrastructure to make all that testing easier, some of the ways that people can contribute. Mm-hmm. What are some of the other things that you would like to encourage people to look at or contribute to, maybe in terms of the community or reaching out? If it's interesting because there are a lot of people coming into Emacs, but there's also, of course, that continued perception that this is hard and this is difficult to learn. And there's like 20 weeks of configuring before you can get somewhere. So do you have any particular thoughts on making it easier in that end as well?
Not necessarily. I think some people out there have been doing good work towards making starter kits and tutorials, and your own video casts, Satya, have been helpful to a lot of people. There's Emacs Rocks. There's different venues for creating information to attract people or interest people in Emacs. The Spacebacks project has been making Emacs a more comfortable environment for Vim users, for example. So there are things going on in the larger community. That's really not, I would say, within, that's something I want to see happen, but it's not something I can have as an area of focus, since it's really getting the core foundation stable that is the responsibility I've taken on. But part of me wanting you to act as our community ambassador is to help keep an eye on those needs in the greater outside community. If there's anything that core developers can do to help support that.
That's true. I should remember to whenever I come across interesting new resources to fold them into the Emacs wiki, which seems to be because it seems to be on its way back up again. People are referring to it and adding to it, which is good.
It's a fantastic resource. I really recommend it to anybody. I continue to discover nuggets within it from time to time.
Just randomly browsing, or
I also randomly browse, yes. I'm bored for an hour. I'll sometimes just wander and stumble through the page links.
Cool. Okay, so let's see. What other things would people probably want to pick your brain on in terms of Emacs and development? Last time we talked, you were sharing some Emacs development tips, and you shared quite a few with Redshank and LRefactor and all of that. Are there other tools that you found to be particularly helpful now that you're reading a lot more code, I guess?
Well, I rely very, very heavily on Magit, so anybody that ever uses Git should definitely look into using that. It's it's also an application that I'm nearly constantly in as sort of my dashboard or working on a project. Projectile is another thing I've greatly enjoyed as a means for jumping to files within a project or grepping across an entire project. FlyCheck is another excellent project, helping me keep an eye on errors I'm making in the buffer as I'm typing them.
Cool. Yeah, they're all very well reviewed, and people are very happy with those packages for sure.
Mm-hmm. Are there any more questions coming in for you from your various sources?
I think people are still. Hang on a second. Oh, okay. So there's a question from Percopop on whether bootstrapping Emacs Lisp and Emacs Lisp is a long-term goal, so that you get rid of the divide of kind of making the C core as small as possible and doing as much as possible in Emacs Lisp, so that people can contribute more even if they only know Emacs Lisp.
So the answer to that is yes.
So yes, smaller core, smaller.
It will happen. How it will happen, I don't know exactly today, but we would love to have the Emacs Lisp part of the whole Emacs equation be as large as feasibly possible.
And then, of course, every so often, people are curious about having other extension languages and other capabilities. I haven't been keeping track of the Emacs Devel conversations about that, though. Do you have any idea of kind of where things are in terms of the big questions that people have, like Guile Emacs or multi-threading, or what's this lexical binding that's starting to show up in cookies in Emacs Lisp files?
Well, so those are several different questions.
I know. Trends, right? Here we go.
Guile Emacs is, of course, always progressing, and I'm curious to see what will become of it. It's not quite at the position right now where it's something we need to seriously consider integrating, but I am very curious to see where it goes and how it evolves. So I keep an eye on that. What's the other one that you mentioned?
Well, lexical binding is starting to show up more and more.
Lexical binding is something that I hope will become more and more used and prevalent, because it promises to resolve certain performance issues we have right now with dynamic binding and the need to look up a symbol within the most global possible scope every single time there's ever a variable reference. So you will see that being used more and more. Otherwise, for what we have today, the C core works pretty well for us as a base foundation language. Emacs Lisp is working pretty well for us. I mean, nothing that we're doing now is preventing anyone from writing great stuff on top of Emacs. So yes, little advantages could be made here and there by making certain changes, but we have to sort of assess those and what value they offer as they come up. So if people have particular ideas, of course, Emacs Devel is the place to bring that up.
Okay, so it's basically just things are happening, and go ask an Emacs Devel if you have further questions.
Yes, and I encourage anybody who has a deep concern about the future of Emacs to join Emacs Devel and be part of the conversation.
And you've started summarizing some of the longer, more involved conversations in Emacs Devel's proposals in Emacs Wiki, right?
Yes, we created a proposals page so that we can sort of capture we can distill the final result of very, very long and large threads in a way that other people can review them and see what the final proposal being made is.
Mm-hmm. One of those long discussions happened around the time that I think they were also discussing your maintainership. Was the Emacs versus IDEs, kind of the features that were missing, or the integration of all of that together. What's happening with this? Kind of I don't know, modernization of Emacs's feature set, the addition of more IDE-like features.
Well,
is that a thing?
Yes, we would like at the core level to have a better API and certain more general APIs for features that have become common to people in other editing environments. So the notion of what is a project, what is the membership of a project, how do you navigate within a project. If you're at a point, there are a lot of disparate features we have out there in the Emacs ecosystem for getting completion lists, for autofilling or providing automatic documentation for the thing that's around point. And everybody is solving it in different ways because there aren't necessarily always good APIs currently existing within core. So we'd like to have those types of APIs in core so that people don't have to reinvent and recreate the same backends for looking up symbols within projects over and over and over again for the various languages.
And that makes sense. Once it's moved into core, then it becomes something that all these packages can rely on. Right. Instead of having these, depends on something, but then somebody else wants to depend on a different package for very similar functionality.
Right. And what it will look like in the end to use such an IDE-empowered Emacs, I don't know yet. But I think right now the first question to ask is, what are those APIs and what should they be to enable package authors to take the best advantage of the information that's available in their environment.
Mm-hmm. So I guess part of that is taking a look at this, the common packages that people are using for this, and then trying to abstract what they're doing in a way that that allows them to then build on top of that common ground.
Exactly. And the ultimate hope for that is that if we have, for example, an underlying API that company mode as a completion framework could rely upon, then the backends that you write to provide that information to company mode could be used by all the other modes that want to glean that information about the symbols relevant to point within a project. So then autocomplete could use that, and Helm could use it, and YaSnippet or Dynamic Abrev or Hippie Expand or whatever, they could all use it. As it is right now, I have myself kind of recoded the same backend with very subtle little changes many times just because I wanted to have that functionality available to several different packages that are kind of similar but not exactly the same.
Refactoring is hard.
Yeah.
There's always little subtleties about how you want to use something that the other packages don't quite do.
Right, and I think that core Emacs can better support those package authors in that way by creating a standard framework within which to capture and ask for this information.
Okay, that makes sense. So kind of like, all right, we'll get the core stable, and then we'll start moving more things into core. And by that, it's like, kind of out of the C core into the Emacs Lisp, and out of that into, out of packages into Emacs Lisp where it makes sense. But some things will be moved out of core into ELPA core, ELPA tarball, so that stuff, so that it's easier to have this well-tested stable core.
Mm-hmm. With the end goal being make it an easier job for the core developers who are currently there and make it easier for new people to join because it won't be such a huge body of code for them to approach.
I wonder, like, there are other open source projects that are also working on expanding their core developer community, and they do that through things like hackathons or kind of the janitor's list, right? This pre-reviewed list of bugs that are super easy and simple to fix, and maybe even have mentors attached to them. And I can't remember if Emacs has one of these things already. I vaguely remember that browsing through the debugs and seeing some of them were tagged with I don't know, newbie or documentation or whatever. But do we have anything like that to guide people into specific, small, non-intimidating areas where they can start making those contributions?
I seem to recall hearing about a keyword we had that was similar to this, but as far as having a hackathon with a bug bounty list, I haven't seen that yet, and I would love to see that. That would be an excellent way for people to know right where to jump in.
Yeah, so maybe that's yet another way for people, for people to contribute, where you can just kind of triage the bugs and say, you know what, this is a super easy bug to fix. Go ahead and try it out. If you get stuck, talk to me. I promise not to bite.
Right.
And then we'll see where it goes with hackathons and the IRC channel and all these other ways that people can coordinate. Awesome. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today. We've talked about the tools that you're using to keep up with all the volume and keeping that overview. So GNUs is awesome and Org is awesome and all those things together are even awesomer.
Yes.
In terms of the community, how people can contribute, and really, Emacs developed. I remember dropping into it every now and then before, but you're right, massive threads, hard to keep track of, and now that things are getting split up into different subject lines, that's so much easier. So Emacs Devel and various online places are becoming friendlier places, easier to keep track of. And then of course, the overall movement of the Emacs source code to be, smaller, stable, more tests and all that stuff, and then all these packages to go. Okay. All right, so I'm going to wrap up here because my throat is starting to give out. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your tips for using all these tools to keep track of what's going on. And thanks again for doing such a wonderful job as a maintainer. I look forward to seeing what Emacs will turn into.
I also lastly wanted to say that if anybody out there is having difficulties contributing to Emacs, or they have found something to be a stumbling block or a reason for them to have become disaffected or leave the community, to approach me directly about those things. Because solving those problems is, to me right now, more important than solving specific technical issues. So my email address is johnw@gnu.org, and it's always open to people who have concerns about Emacs and where it's going.
And I can vouch for you being an awesome person who so you definitely helped me get into all the Emacs development stuff when I got started in 2000 and whatever. So I can't wait to see who else you can bring into the community from there. As mentioned, you can find John at johnw@gnu.org. Are there other places where people should go and find you, just in case they're curious about finding out more?
On Freenode, I'm usually in the Emacs channel there.
And you're on Twitter as
I'm on Twitter as well as Wiegley. And then, of course, the Emacs Devel mailing list. Love to see you there.
All right, then. I'm going to wrap up here. The recording will be available from the same place on Google+, and I'll post it in all the usual places as well. Thanks again, John. I'm going to stop the broadcast here, and thanks, everyone, for listening.
Thank you, Sasha.